Hey, it's Sean McMean from VinnyMac Restoration Marketing, and today's podcast is going to be about how you should be answering the phone calls for Google Local Service calls.
This isn't just any podcast. This is your secret weapon for dominating the market.
This is the Restoration Marketing Secrets Podcast, and this is your host, Sean McMean.
If you're using Google Local Services, you should be aware that there's the ability to dispute leads that come in that are not qualified. And it's extremely important the way you answer the phone call and what type of questions you ask those leads that are coming in through Google Local Services so that you can get your best chance of disputing and getting credits back for calls that are not qualified. We all know that Google Local Services is a platform that goes also by Google Guaranteed, but this is a platform that you have to be certified for by submitting IICR certification. You have to submit certificate of insurance and all of those sort of things. And it's an amazing platform that we use to connect with homeowners that need your services. But the best part about it is that you can get credits back on calls that are not qualified, right? And so this podcast is going to be about how you should be answering the phone calls. There are two types of leads that you're going to get from Google Local Services. The first one is phone calls. The second one is messages. So that's the two types the two ways that someone can reach out to you from Google Local Service ads. And so if somebody gives you a phone call, you want to make sure, again, it's probably common sense here, but you want to make sure you answer that phone call, right? So if you don't answer that phone call or you have missed calls on Google Local Service, it's going to impact how many times they recommend your company. And they track this. They have call tracking in place and they can see all of these stats, right? So if you miss calls, it's a huge, huge problem, right? And so answer that phone quickly. If you are a small company that does not have somebody dedicated to answering the phones and it rings your cell phone directly, you could be setting yourself up for some struggles with Google Local Services. So if you need to do an answering service for that, that would be a recommendation. But at the end of the day, you have to answer all those phone calls that come in. Just as if you're using any sort of other paid ads platform out there, if you miss the calls, they're not going to recommend you anymore and you're not going to get the best out of the service. So that's number one. Be prepared and be prompt when you're answering the phone calls, right? Don't let it ring 10 times and shuffle between a bunch of cell phones. Answer the phone call quickly. Might sound like common sense, but just a reminder on that. Number two, ask qualifying questions. So what do I mean by this? When you set up your Google Local Services account, put a tracking number on that setting. Don't put your main number on there. Number one, a tracking number will let you track for sure how many calls are coming from Google Local Services, because if you ask the caller, sometimes they're going to be like, I found you on Google. Well, where'd you find me on Google? Well, I don't know if it's the Google Maps or paid ads or pay-per-click or Google Local Services, all of those things. By having a dedicated tracking number, you can for sure track how many calls are coming into Google Local Services. And then the second thing you can do is you can put a whisper on that call so that it can say when it rings to you that this is a Google Local Services call. And you can treat these calls a little bit differently than you would all the other calls that you receive. So what you can do then is you want to make sure, asking them the nature and why they're called. Is it water damage, mold, fire, whatever it may be? Are they the homeowner? Have they filed an insurance claim already or not? Do they plan to file insurance claim? Do they have insurance, right? Do they have, if it's a basement flood, is that covered under their insurance policy? When did the damage occur and what areas of the property are affected? All of those are important questions you want to make sure you ask. Sometimes when we get these calls coming in, we just want to get out there as fast as possible. But you really, truly need to collect all of that information up front to determine whether this is a qualified call and whether you can actually help them out. You should be asking a lot of these questions on the call for every single call that comes in, but you absolutely do want to do it for Google Local Services. You want to ask them where they're located at, right? Make sure it falls within your service area and that you can get out there in a timely manner. And then most importantly, you want to make sure you communicate clearly, right? If it's an overnight call and you're answering the phone and you're half asleep, that's not going to gain a lot of trust. So if it's after hours, you need to make sure whoever's answering that phone, whether it's an answering service or a team member, they're going to be available and be clear when they communicate, right? Obviously, be polite as well. There's a lot of times I'll listen to calls and they'll be like, yeah, how can I help you? That's not the way you answer the phone. You want to answer the phone politely. You want to answer the phone professionally and with a clear voice that gains trust and gains credibility for that person calling you. So thanks for calling. How can I help you with the water issue? Thanks for calling ABC Restoration. How can I help you? Those sort of things just seem like common sense, but a lot of times they're not followed, and it makes a big, big difference, right? So when you're asking those qualifying questions and communicating clearly, then you can determine whether this is a lead that you can help them out with. And if it's not, do not collect contact information from that call. So here's the difference, right? If you set this up as a lot of people do normally, hey, thanks for calling. How can I help you? They say, well, I've got a flood, whatever that issue may be. Great. What's your name? What's your contact details? All of those things. Don't do that at the first part of the call, okay, on Google Local Services calls, because as soon as you collect that contact information, Google will absolutely charge you for that call. And you don't know if they're the homeowner. You don't know if they have insurance. You don't know their coverage. You don't know all the details about it. And so you need to get all those details on Google Local Services calls before you actually collect the contact information, okay? And so Google's undergoing some changes on the dispute process of all of this, but you want to make sure, I'll talk about the dispute process in just a second here, but you want to make sure that you ask these qualifying questions, you communicate clearly, and you determine if it's a good fit call and have criteria of what are not good fit calls, right? If it's not the homeowner, do not collect contact information. Tell them the property owner has to call you and leave it at that. Because as soon as you collect that contact information, you're going to get charged $200, $300, whatever that lead cost is. And that might not be, you don't want to be wasting your money there, right? So the other thing is make sure your team clearly documents that information, the contact information, whether it's a form that you write on a piece of paper like this, or whether it's a CRM that you're collecting that information out of the go. Those are all important things you need to be doing when you receive phone calls from Google Local Services. The second type of Google Local Service lead that you can receive is what's called a message lead. And so what a message lead is it allows somebody to reach out and send basically sort of like a text message or a form to you. And these are usually about a quarter of the cost of what a phone call lead is. They typically do not convert as well. On that, when they send that message, they have the option of whether they can put their phone number in there or not. Some people choose not to put their phone number. Some people just put their name and then ask the question that they have. Now, clearly, if you get the message over that has a phone number, I would call them as soon as possible. Every message lead will not have a phone number associated with it. But what's important is that you review the lead and you respond to the lead effectively to qualify that lead, right? And so there's multiple ways that you can respond to it. You can use the Google Local Services app on your phone or on a desktop, and you can send them back a response. If you get the alert, an email alert, and it has a phone number in it, you can call them. So those are ways that you can speak and reach out to them, right? It's important to make sure you're timely with those responses. And what Google will actually do is they will say how long it takes you to reply. So if you take a day to reply to that person, it's going to say on your profile, typical replies in a day. That's not going to look very good from a conversion aspect, right? So you want to be responding to those messages as quickly as possible. So you have that app on your phone, have a couple people on your team with the Google Local Services app on their phone, have user accounts in there so they get alerts and they get email notifications and text messages that they got a message response, right? Some people will disable message response because they don't want to deal with it. But honestly, it's a lot cheaper to get those. And if it's not a qualified message that comes in, you can respond back and say, unfortunately, this is not a service we provide, or this is not an area we service. And so you can do those same sort of disputing options there, okay? So to help you qualify them. And finally, when you do receive these calls and messages, Google has a disputing process that they use in order to issue credits. As of, late June 2024, they're making some changes in this platform. I'm going to be talking about this on a later series here, but they're making changes where they're removing the ability to dispute based on service or location. So if on your map you have you're trying to cover the entire state, and you get a lead from outside your service area, and you say, well, this is not a service area that I can do, but my settings show that you can, you're not going to get credits on that anymore. If you have somebody calling about so for instance, you have checked off mold inspection and you don't do mold inspections, or you don't do mold removal, and you have that checked off within your Google Local Services profile, you're no longer going to be able to dispute those. What Google is now deploying, what they've said they're going to deploy, is AI-based disputing. So they're going to determine whether it was based on AI technology. They're going to listen to the phone call and determine whether it was a qualified service or qualified service area. There are still the ability to dispute for spam and repeat customers and things like that. But this is a newer update that's happening. So we want to make sure we qualify these calls more than ever out of the gate on the conversation before you collect contact information. So that way, if it's not qualified, you're not paying for that lead. And so these are some great ways that you can save money, book more jobs by using Google Local Service Ads, Google Guaranteed, and ultimately, this is how you should be answering the phone. So hopefully this helps out. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Restoration Marketing Secrets Podcast. Sean's not here to just talk the talk. He's walked the walk. With a track record of helping over 70 damage restoration companies and engaging in over 500 conversations with industry owners, he's seen it all. From digital marketing triumphs to the most ingenious growth hacks, he's got the keys to the kingdom, and he's sharing them with you. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, for more, hit the website at restorationmarketing.com. See you next time on the Restoration Marketing Secrets Podcast.